Hey adventurers, so today is going to be the next batch of my top 100 books of all time. This is numbers 30 through 21, so let's get right into it. At number 30, I have Lis Robs by Victor Hugo. I just in 2023 read this book and reviewed it, and it was one of my favorite books of the year. I think I placed it in number 3 slot because there was 2 other books that surprised me and I loved them more. But Lis Robs, fantastic story, very engaging story, very well told story, very good writing, very witty, even with its translation from French into English. Just everything about the story really good. The character arcs, the storyline that was going on. The one thing that I can say negatively about this book is it's too long and it's overwritten. Neither things that I personally have an issue with because I enjoyed every moment that I was listening to the book, but it could be abridged, greatly abridged, and it wouldn't hurt the book, which is why I'm sure that it has been abridged with really good abbreviations. I don't know. So yeah, very good book. Definitely deserves its spot in this as number 30 on this list. Just fantastic book, but it is a little overwritten and it is a little longer than it needs to be. Brings us to number 29, which is The Giver. This is one of those books that kind of changed my perspective on stories. This is kind of one of those books that I think about all the time, that I go back and look at and examine the story once again. Of course, it's dystopian, it's a YA dystopian, one of those generic, it falls into that generic category, except that it's so different than any of the other YA dystopian series. And I love this book. It captured my imagination. I read it at the perfect time for it to capture my imagination, just when I was starting to understand the world in more ways, but also still young enough that I could enjoy the story for what it is and just have fun with what it was doing. I can still do that to some degree, but I read it at the perfect time, and now every time I go back and look back at it, I get more out of it. I see more things from it that I appreciate, that I have learned to love about this story, and so it deserves its spot on this list. That's all I can say. I do have a review for it, I believe, and so I do recommend going and watching my review, because I'm sure if it's there, I'm sure my thoughts are far more detailed, far more complete, I guess, than I am doing here, and that's fine. Anyways, that is number 29. Number 28 then is Unfinished Tales of Numenor and Middle-earth by J.R. Tolkien. This is a collection of his unfinished stories. They're short stories to novellas to novels, some of them, but they're stories of Numenor and Middle-earth, so Second Age primarily stories, although there are some that are First Age as well. And these are just stories that he started writing that he never completed. That's why they're unfinished tales. But they're pieces of some of his greater stories, like The Children of Hurin, The Fall of Gondolin, stuff like that. And so this story, this book, has some of the most vivid imagery, some of the most amazing stories are in this book. Unfortunately, they are unfinished, and because of that, we don't get to see how Tolkien would have wrapped them up, how he would have ended them. We also don't get to see what his final version of them would have been. So there are some things about it that it cannot be at the same level as his finished and completed stories, but it is fantastic and a must-read for any Tolkien fan, any Lord of the Rings fan, because some of them are slower, some of them are faster, but they expand and build on the world so much, and they're just beautiful, some of them. Very much recommend this collection, it is a collection, yeah, this collection of Tolkien's unfinished stories for Middle-earth. Number 27, it's basically tied with The Giver. It basically in The Giver could be flip-flopped, whatever, back and forth. It's basically 1 and 2, and this is Gathering Bloom. This is the second book in the Giver Quartet, and it is my favorite book of the series. Book 4 is Messenger, and book 3 is Messenger, book 4 is Sun, and neither of them are my favorite of the series. I think that Sun has some really good things about it. It has some really interesting storytelling that's going on with it, some really interesting themes that it's playing with. Messenger, I had a lot of issues with, partly because it made me recontextualize the entire series in a way that I didn't love. It took this series from being dystopian sci-fi to dystopian fantasy. We're not talking about Messenger, we were talking about Gathering Blue, which is my favorite of the series. It didn't have quite the same emotional impact as The Giver did, but it tells a story that is so much more personal to me in many ways. It just the story that's being told, obviously Gathering Blue, it has to do with color, and color is one of those things that to me is so important. I don't know why it's as important, but when color is important to a story, the story, the world, the setting, everything about the story becomes so much more vivid, so much more imaginative to me, and I just get so much more attached and so much more immersed in the story when color has something to do with it, whether that's the magic system, whatever it might be. Color is important to me for some reason. I don't even know why, but color is very important to me. And Gathering Blue deals a lot with color, a lot with shades, a lot with, the character is a seamstress and she's fixing these ceremonial robes, essentially is what she's doing. But she has to be able to see color in perfect, basically she has to be able to see the colors in a way that nobody else can. It's part of what it harkens back to The Giver in so many ways, because The Giver and the Receiver, then they have this ability to see color in a way that nobody else in the community can. And so it kind of harkens back and ties directly into The Giver that Gathering Blue does, but it also furthers the story and tells its own very, very different story from The Giver, and I loved what we get in Gathering Blue. That's long enough on that one. We'll move on to number 26, which is Outcast Redwall. This is another one that I have long considered to be one of my favorite books in the Redwall series. Outcast Redwall, again, in my last batch I talked about Tagrung and how that deals with a generally good guy character being taken and raised by bad guys. This is basically the opposite. This is a vermin character who's taken and raised by the Redwallers, and we see that story of Vale living in Redwall and seeing how he reacts and seeing how this world works, and him growing up and him making decisions. It's about Vale making decisions. It's also more than that. Vale's story actually is only the last third-ish of the book. The rest of the story is about Sunflash the Mace, and Sunflash being a Redwall or a Badger character, one of my favorite characters. The Badger Lords are so interesting, they're so cool. The lore that they have is weird, but it's really cool as well. And anyways, I really like Sunflash and his story, and so the story, the mix of Sunflash's story and Vale's story, super cool. Just the way that the story is framed, is told, is really well done, and it's just one of my favorite books in the Redwall series. Number 25, we have A Wizard of Earthsea. This is the first book in the Earthsea cycle. I loved Earthsea. I don't have a whole lot to say. I talked about this with Tahanu, and I don't know if and Tooms Vatwan in the previous two videos in this series. And basically, A Wizard of Earthsea and this Earthsea series, Earthsea cycle as a whole, they are really interesting because yes, they are action, there is an adventure, especially in the first two, but it's also contemplative. It also asks questions. It's about the themes more so than it is about the action and adventure in so many of the ways. And I love that. It's also the character of Sparrowhawk and Sparrowhawk's journey in this first book, from being somebody who, a shepherd, to being a wizard. And in the story that he has to go through and the journey that he goes through from basically tearing a hole in reality, in some ways that's oversimplification and not at all accurate to the lore, but I'm just going to call it that. Tearing a hole in reality and then him having to deal with the consequences of that. Very interesting, and it's overcoming himself type storyline, and it's just super cool. I love everything about this book. I do need to reread it because I think I could get more out of it upon reread, because like I mentioned, I don't know all of the fine details of how things go together. I don't remember them. I remember the story as a whole though, and I remember loving the story as a whole. Moving on to number 24, this is A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness is the author, and this is one that I need to reread because I read it once and I loved it. And it's very impactful, it's very short, very emotional book. And I need to reread it, but I remember loving it. I remember the anytime that within a story there's a storyteller telling stories, I love it. Okay, that's part of why I in the Cosmere, in Sanderson's Cosmere, I don't dislike wit, because that storyteller character, that bard, that troubadour, whatever you want to call him, I love storytellers, and storytellers within telling a story within a story is such a cool framing device. It's such a cool way to impart wisdom, impart these themes that you're trying to tell. It's so cool. The emotional, or the personal story of Connor that you're reading, the personal emotional story of Connor is so impactful. The monster, super cool. The world building, the setting, everything about it. I loved Monster Calls, but I do need to reread it because I don't remember. I don't remember it, more of I want to re-experience it. Number 23 is The Voyage of the Dawn Treader by C.S. Lewis. This is chronologically the 5th book in the Chronicles of Narnia series. Why do I have this one on here at this point? I love this series. I love the journey that we're going on. I love the character development for Eustace, a character that I despise at the beginning of the book, but by the end you're like, you know what, he's grown a lot, and that's kind of the part of it. It's also the story, the last story that we get with Edmund and Lucy as main characters. We're going on a ship adventure, a seafaring adventure. We're going to visit all these cool, strange lands in this world. It's still a portal fantasy, but there's still some really great themes that are biblical themes that are coming through. Lewis is still playing with the allegory, although it's not nearly as blatant as in Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. It's just, I love a lot of what's going on in this book. Which then actually leads us directly into number 22, which is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis, which is the chronological 2nd book in the series. And what can I really say about this series that hasn't been said? I love it. I do appreciate the allegorical aspects of the story. I do appreciate the Christian aspects of the story. At the same time, I appreciate that you can just read the story as a fantasy story and enjoy that. Yeah, so a lot of similar thoughts to Voyage of the Dawn Treader, where I love getting to go through this portal and experience this new, fantastical, whimsical world. The tie-ins with mythology, with history, with Christian allegory and Christian themes and all that kind of stuff, biblical themes. It's so cool, it's so well done. I very much enjoy these books. But yeah, so that's those two. At number 21, I have Le Morte d'Arthur by Sir Thomas Malory. Of course, I have Volume 1 and Volume 2 here. This is a series, oh, it's not a series, it's a single book, that is the quintessential Arthurian canon, essentially. This is, when you read, when you're looking at the Arthurian mythos, the Arthurian saga, the Arthurian series, the Arthurian world, the story, whatever you want to call it. Le Morte d'Arthur is kind of what people go to as, this is canon, this is the basis, this is what we look to, this is the collection of the stories taken and combined and bound up into one story, one volume, with somewhat of a through line. And just for that alone, it deserves to be on this list. It's fantastic. But beyond that, I also really enjoy the book. I enjoy the what is this? The knightly setting, the court of King Arthur. I love King Arthur stories. I love the way that it's written, the way that the story is told, the fact that sometimes we do just get chapters of jousting, sometimes it's chapters of character development, sometimes it's this, that, and the other, and it's taking from everything in this Arthurian world that we know and combining it into a story that still ends where it's supposed to end, that begins where it's supposed to begin, and just leads us through this story while hitting the majority of the major stories in Arthur's world to this point. Of course, it doesn't contain there's some stories that doesn't contain. Cloak and Olwen is one of them, although that's a much smaller Welsh story rather than British, English. It also doesn't contain Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. But these are other stories that are kind of, they don't actually belong in the narrative of Le Morte d'Arthur. And as such, I'm fine with them being out and you're able to experience them as their own stories without being part of this. Is this the definitive version of every single story told in these stories? No. But it is a great way to take them all and combine them and kind of canonize them or contain them, I guess, into one series, one volume, one story, so you can see how the things fit into this world of King Arthur's court. And then there's all these other stories that go as well. But I very much really enjoy Le Morte d'Arthur. Not the best, not the easiest book to read by any means. It is an older style English, and it's also translated from a Middle English, and so it's not easy to read, but it is very good. So yeah, that is my number 21 on this list, and that closes out this 30 through 21. We've just got 3 more videos in the series to go, numbers 20 through 11, some honorable mentions or books that I forgot to put on this list for whatever reason, and then a 10 through 1. So we're approaching the end now. Thank you guys for watching an Erudite Adventurer. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already, and we will see you guys again soon. Stay warm.